There are things in this life we cannot change, no matter how long we hold on to them. Perhaps you are carrying something tonight. Not something you can name easily. Not something with a clear shape. Only a weight, settled somewhere behind the ribs, that has been there so long you have almost mistaken it for a part of you. A memory you keep returning to, though returning never seems to change it. A regret worn smooth from handling. A grief that never announced itself loudly, but simply moved in one day, quietly, and never quite moved out again. Maybe you have spent a long time trying to fix what cannot be fixed, rehearsing conversations that already ended, holding tightly to people or seasons or versions of yourself that have already, gently, let go of you first. Maybe you are simply tired, not the kind of tired that sleep alone can answer, but the kind that comes from carrying a ledger of everything that went wrong and forgetting, somewhere along the way, to set it down. If any of this feels familiar, you are not alone in it, and you do not need to solve it tonight. This is not a story that will tell you how to fix what you carry. It will not hand you an answer, or a lesson, or a lighter version of your burden to trade for the heavy one. It only asks one small thing of you, that you rest here a while, beside a quiet river, in a valley where nothing is in a hurry, and let your breathing slow to match a place that has never once needed to hurry itself. There is an old man in this story who tends a small hermitage beside moving water. He does not have answers either. He simply lives, day by day, in a way that quietly, unknowingly, makes room for things to be as they are. And there is a traveler, much like you, who arrives tired, carrying something she cannot yet name, and who slowly, gently, without ever being told to, learns to set part of it down. You do not need to remember the details by morning. You do not need to stay awake for the ending. If your eyes grow heavy before the story is finished, that is not a failure of attention. That is the story working exactly as it was meant to. So let your shoulders soften now, wherever you are lying. Let your breath find its own slow rhythm. And when you're ready, let the path begin. Narrow, quiet, leading gently downhill, toward the sound of a river that has been waiting, patiently, for a very long time. Somewhere not so far from where your thoughts are resting now, another traveler was beginning a quiet journey of her own. She too had carried something for a long while, without ever quite naming it. Her name was Kaya, and on an autumn afternoon, much like this one, she found herself walking a narrow mountain path toward the sound of water she could not yet see. Outside, the river went on speaking to the stones. Kaya had been walking since morning, though by now the morning felt like something that had happened to someone else. Her legs remembered the miles more clearly than her mind did. The road behind her had turned to dirt, then to stone, then to something softer. Pine needles, damp moss. The quiet give of earth that had not been walked on in a long while. She did not know exactly why she had chosen this direction. There had been a fork lower down the mountain, one path wide and one path narrow, and she had simply taken the narrow one, the way a person sometimes chooses a smaller kindness over a larger convenience, without being able to say why. The trees here grew close together. Bamboo mostly, tall and pale green, leaning slightly with the evening wind, so that the whole grove seemed to breathe as one long, slow creature. Somewhere above her, a bird called twice, and then went silent, as if it had only meant to mark the hour. The light was the color of weak tea now, amber at the edges, cooling toward grey. She heard the river before she saw it. It was not a loud sound. It was the sound of something that had been moving for a very long time and had stopped being in any hurry about it. A low, continuous murmur, water finding the same stones it had found the evening before, and the evening before that, and every evening for longer than Kaya could imagine. The sound did not rise or fall. It simply continued, patient as breath. She followed it. The bamboo thinned, and the path opened onto a clearing where the river curved gently around a low stone building with a wooden roof silvered by weather. Smoke rose from somewhere behind it, thin and unhurried, dissolving into the darkening sky. A plum tree stood near the door, its leaves beginning to turn at the edges, gold bleeding slowly into green, and beside the door, hanging from a low wooden post, was a lantern. It was not lit yet. The paper of its shade had yellowed with age, soft as old parchment, and a single dark line ran down one side where it had once been mended. It swayed almost imperceptibly, though Kaya could not feel any wind at all. She stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, feeling suddenly like a guest who had arrived without an invitation, though of course there had been no invitation to arrive without. The hermitage, if that was the right word for it, asked nothing of her. It simply existed there, the way the river existed, the way the mountain existed, without needing her permission or her explanation. Her feet were tired. Her shoulders ached in the way shoulders ache when they have been carrying something for longer than the pack on her back accounted for. She did not know what that something was. She had stopped trying to name it many miles ago, somewhere around the second river crossing, when she had realized that naming it only seemed to make it heavier. The door of the hermitage was open. An old man sat just inside it, on a low wooden step, mending something with his hands. A piece of rope, or perhaps a net. It was hard to tell in the dimming light. He wore simple grey robes, faded from years of sun and washing, and his hair was white and cut close to his scalp. He did not look up right away. When he did, his eyes were unhurried. They moved over her the way the wind moves over water, noticing everything, disturbing nothing. "You've walked a long way," he said. It was not a question, so Kaya did not feel the need to answer it as one. She simply nodded. The old man set down whatever he'd been mending. His hands, she noticed, were the hands of someone who had done many small tasks for many years. Creased, sun-marked, steady. "There's a room," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the side of the building near the plum tree. "It isn't much, but the roof doesn't leak, and the bed is closer to the ground than most, which some people find they prefer." Kaya's throat felt suddenly tight, though she couldn't have said whether it was from gratitude or exhaustion or something else entirely. Some third thing that didn't have a clean name. "Thank you," she managed. The old man had already returned his attention to the rope in his lap, as though the conversation, brief as it was, had reached its natural end and did not require anything further to close it properly. He did not ask where she had come from. He did not ask where she was going. He did not ask why a young woman was walking alone into the mountains as the light failed, with a pack too light for a long journey and eyes too tired for a short one. Kaya found to her quiet surprise that she was grateful for all the things he did not ask. She stepped past him into the clearing, toward the small room by the plum tree. The grass here was damp with early evening, cool through the thin soles of her sandals. Somewhere behind the hermitage, water moved over stone in its slow, unbroken rhythm. And somewhere above, the first stars were beginning to press faintly through the fading blue. At the door of her room, she paused and looked back. The old man had risen. He was doing something at the lantern post, striking a small flame, cupping it with one weathered hand against a wind that did not seem to exist, and lowering it gently into the lantern's paper shade. The flame caught. It steadied. Warm light spilled out in a soft circle onto the packed earth below, touching the edge of the plum tree's lowest branch, touching the doorstep, touching nothing else at all, and yet somehow seeming to touch everything. He did this without ceremony. It was not a ritual performed for an audience. It was simply a thing that was done each evening, the way the river simply continued each evening, the way the bamboo simply leaned each evening in a wind Kaya still could not feel. She watched the small flame a moment longer than she meant to. There was something in the sight of it, small, contained, unbothered by the size of the darkness around it, that loosened something in her chest, some knot she'd been carrying so long she had almost stopped noticing its weight. She did not know the old man's name yet. She did not know how long she would stay, or why this particular fork in the path had felt, for reasons she could not explain, like the right one. She only knew that the lantern was lit and the river was moving, and somewhere close by, an owl called once into the deepening blue and was not answered and did not seem to mind. She turned and went inside and did not bother lighting a second flame. The lantern outside was enough. Its glow reached faintly through the thin paper of her window, gentle and low, like a hand resting quietly on a shoulder. She lay down on the low bed without changing out of her traveling clothes. The mattress was thin, but the floor beneath it was solid, and after so many nights of uneven ground, solid felt like a kind of luxury. Outside, the river went on speaking to the stones. The bamboo went on leaning into its unfelt wind, and the lantern, small and steady, burned on into the deepening dark, asking nothing of the night, and receiving in return nothing but its own quiet company. Kayada closed her eyes. She did not fall asleep right away, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not mind the waiting. Morning arrived without announcement. There was no sudden light, no sharp edge to the dark. It simply thinned hour by hour, the way water thins from grey to blue, until Kaya opened her eyes and found the inside of a small room washed in a soft, papery brightness. Somewhere close by, wood was being split, a slow, even sound, unhurried as a held breath, one log at a time. She lay still for a while, listening. Beneath the sound of the wood, she could hear the river again, closer now in the daylight, still speaking its long, unbroken sentence to the stones. A bird moved through the bamboo outside her window, and the leaves answered it with a soft, dry rustle, like paper folding. When she finally rose and stepped outside, she found Master Tenzin crouched beside a small stone hearth at the side of the hermitage. feeding thin sticks into a modest fire. A blackened kettle sat beside him, waiting. He did not look up right away, though she had the impression, somehow, that he had heard her the moment her feet touched the earth outside her door. "Sit if you'd like," he said. "The water isn't ready yet. It won't be ready for a while." There was no urgency in the way he said it. It was simply a fact, offered the way one might mention the weather. Kaya lowered herself onto a low stone bench nearby, still warm from yesterday's sun, though the morning air held a faint chill. She drew her sleeves down over her hands and watched the small flames work their way along the sticks, unhurried, orange and blue at the edges. Tenzin fed the fire slowly. One stick, a pause, another stick. He did not add wood the way a person adds wood who wants a fire quickly. He added it the way a person adds wood who has never once, in all his years, needed a fire to hurry. "You slept," he said. Again, not quite a question. "A little," Kaya admitted. "Better than I have in some time." He nodded, as if this were the expected answer. Neither better nor worse than he had imagined. He set the kettle over the flame and settled back onto his heels, hands resting loosely on his knees, and for a long while neither of them spoke at all. The silence did not feel empty. It felt, Kaya thought, a little like the silence of the bamboo grove, full of small sounds if you listen closely enough. The fire ticking softly, a branch somewhere shifting its weight. The river, always the river, running beneath everything else like a single low note beneath a song. She found herself watching the old man's hands as he waited. They did not fidget. They simply rested. It occurred to her that she could not remember the last time she had watched someone simply wait for something without also watching them grow impatient with the waiting. Even her own hands, she realized, wanted something to do. She pressed them flat against her knees and made herself still when the water finally began to murmur inside the kettle. Not a boil yet, just the first restless stirring of heat. Tenzin lifted it from the fire with a cloth wrapped around the handle and set it aside to settle. "Too hot, and the leaves scream," he said almost to himself. "Better to let it rest a moment. Everything settles if you give it time." He said this plainly, the way a person states the temperature of water without any weight placed beneath the words to suggest they meant more than they said. And yet Kaya felt them settle somewhere inside her chest anyway, quietly, without asking permission. He brought out 2 small clay cups, worn smooth at the rims from years of hands, and a little wooden box that held pale green tea leaves, curled tight as sleeping things. He measured them not with a spoon, but with his fingers, an old habit clearly, needing no tool, but memory. Then he poured. He did not pour quickly. The water fell from the kettle spout in a thin, unbroken thread, filling the first cup slowly, and then the second, with the kind of care Kaya associated with tasks that mattered. Though surely, she thought, pouring tea was among the smallest tasks a person could perform in a day, and yet watching him, she was not so sure that was true. Steam rose from the cups in soft curling ribbons, catching the early light. The smell reached her before the warmth did. Something green and slightly bitter, softened by a sweetness underneath, like grass after rain. He handed her a cup with both hands. and she received it the same way. Without quite knowing why, that felt like the correct thing to do.
"Careful," he said. "It's patient tea. It doesn't like to be rushed."
Kea smiled despite herself. The first real smile she could remember making in what felt like a very long stretch of days. She held the cup close to her chest, feeling its warmth soak into her palms, into the tired muscles of her hands, and did not drink right away. Instead, she watched the steam rise and disappear into the morning air, and beyond it, the bamboo swaying gently at the grove's edge, and beyond that, the plum tree, with its leaves just beginning to turn gold. And beyond that, somewhere out of sight, but never out of hearing, the river continuing its long, unhurried sentence. The same words it must have spoken yesterday, and the day before, and every day for longer than either of them had lived. When she finally drank, the tea was warm rather than hot, gentle on her tongue, slightly bitter, and then, a moment later, quietly sweet. "It's good," she said. Tenzin only nodded, sipping his own, his eyes half closed, looking at nothing in particular, or perhaps looking at everything at once, in the unfocused way that people look at things they have already fully seen many, many times before, and no longer need to examine closely to appreciate. They sat like that for a long while, the fire slowly dying to embers beside them, the cups slowly emptying, the morning slowly warming the stone bench beneath them by degrees too small to notice happening. Kea did not ask him any questions. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did not want to. The questions she had carried up the mountain, the ones she had rehearsed in her mind on the long walk, the ones about grief and rest, and what a person was supposed to do with a weight they could not name. All of them seemed, in this quiet, oddly unnecessary, not answered, just unnecessary. The way a question about the color of the sky becomes unnecessary once you are simply standing beneath it. When at last she set her empty cup down on the stone beside her, Tenzin glanced at it and then at her, with something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood as one. "There is more water in the kettle," he said. "If you would like to sit a while longer." She would. And so she did. And the fire continued to settle into ash, and the bamboo continued to lean into its wind, and the river, patient as ever, continued on beneath it all, needing nothing from either of them, and giving in return exactly that, a sound to rest inside, and nothing more it asked of her at all. The day passed the way days seem to pass in places where no one is keeping close track of them. Kaya slept through much of the afternoon, waking once to find a small bowl of rice and pickled greens left quietly outside her door, still faintly warm, though she had not heard footsteps approach or retreat. She ate slowly, sitting on the low step of her room, watching the light move across the clearing. Gold, then amber, then the soft blue-grey of early evening, and did not think very much about anything at all. It was strange, she thought, how tired a person could be even after doing nothing but walking and sleeping, as if the tiredness had never really belonged to her legs in the first place. By the time true night settled over the valley, she found she could not sleep. It was not an unpleasant wakefulness. Her body was heavy with rest, her mind slow and soft at the edges. But something in her simply would not settle, the way a held breath sometimes will not release, even once there is no longer any reason to hold it. She lay in the dark for a while, listening to the small sounds of the hermitage at rest, a settling beam somewhere in the roof, the faint tick of the cooling night air against old wood. Beneath it all, steady as always, the river continued its long, unbroken murmur. Eventually she rose, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The night was clear and cold in the particular way that mountain nights are cold, not biting, but clean, as if the air itself had been rinsed of anything unnecessary. Above the clearing, more stars than she could ever remember seeing scattered across the dark in slow, careless handfuls. The lantern by the door had burned down to a low ember of light, casting almost nothing now, its work for the evening nearly finished. She followed the sound of the river without quite deciding to. The path down to the water was narrow and soft with moss, and the moonlight, though thin, was enough to find her footing. When the trees opened, she saw the river laid out before her, wide and dark and gleaming faintly where the moon touched its surface, moving with the same unhurried patience it had shown all through her first evening and morning here. Master Tenzin was already there. He sat on a flat stone near the water's edge, his robes pulled close against the chill, his face turned toward the current, unmoving. He did not seem surprised to hear her approach, and did not turn to greet her, only shifted very slightly, the way one shifts to make room on a bench without needing to say so aloud. Kaya lowered herself onto a neighboring stone, close enough to feel some faint edge of the fire's warmth still clinging to him, though the night air had long since claimed the rest of the clearing. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The river at night sounded different than it had in daylight, she thought. Or perhaps it was only that there was less to listen to alongside it now. No birds, no rustle of the grove, no distant sound of someone splitting wood. Just the water itself, moving over stones it had known for years beyond counting, saying the same low, endless thing it always said. To no one in particular, and to everyone who happened to be listening. I couldn't sleep, Kaya said finally, because the silence, comfortable as it was, seemed to leave a small space for her to fill if she wished. Tenzin nodded slowly, still watching the water. The river doesn't sleep either, he said, and yet it never seems tired. Kaya turned this over in her mind, the way one turns over a smooth stone, feeling its shape without needing to understand exactly why it had been handed to her. Why not? She asked, though she was not certain she meant it as a real question. It isn't trying to get anywhere, Tenzin said. It is already exactly where it needs to be at every moment. Only the arriving looks like movement from the shore. He said this simply, without any weight placed beneath it, the way he had spoken of the tea leaves needing patience, the way he had spoken of the water needing to rest before it was poured. Kaya did not ask him to explain further. She found again that she did not especially want him to. The words settled into her the way water settles into dry earth, not all at once, not with any visible change, but somewhere beneath the surface, quietly, without asking to be noticed. They sat together a long while after that, saying nothing more. The moon climbed a little higher, and its reflection on the water grew brighter and then dimmer as thin clouds passed high overhead, unhurried as everything else in this valley seemed to be. Somewhere across the river, an owl called once, low and round, and was answered after a pause by another further off. Kaya found herself listening for a third call that never came, and found, oddly, that its absence did not feel like anything was missing. Her shoulders, she noticed, had lowered without her telling them to. The blanket around her felt heavier now, warmer, pulling her gently down into the stillness of the stone beneath her. She thought briefly of the life she had left somewhere down the mountain, the noise of it, the hurry of it, the particular ache she had been carrying so long that she had almost mistaken it for a permanent part of her chest, like a rib. She did not examine the thought closely. She only let it pass by, the way the river let each ripple pass by, without holding on to any single one of them for very long. "Does it ever feel strange?" she asked quietly, "living beside something that never stops?" Tenzin was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his voice was soft, almost fond. "At first," he said, "but then you notice, it isn't fighting to keep moving. It's only moving because that is what water does. There's no strain in it, only continuing." Kaya looked at the water a while longer, watching the moonlight scatter and reform across its surface, never twice in quite the same pattern, and yet always, somehow, recognizably, the same river. Her eyes grew heavy before she noticed them growing heavy. Beside her, Tenzin rose without a word, brushing the moss gently from his robes, and offered her a hand to help her to her feet. An old, worn hand, warm despite the night's chill. They walked back up the narrow path together in silence, the lantern's last low ember guiding them the final stretch. And at her door, Tenzin only nodded once, a small goodnight that needed no words attached to it, before turning toward his own quiet corner of the hermitage. Kaya lay down this time and felt sleep come almost at once, not a falling exactly, but more like sinking, slow and complete, the way a stone settles at last to the bottom of a river it has been carried along by for a very long time. Outside, the water went on speaking, the moon went on climbing, and somewhere in the dark, the lantern's last small ember faded quietly into the wider night, without complaint and without needing to be missed. Kaya woke to a single sound. It was not loud. It was round and low, spreading outward through the cool morning air, the way ripples spread from a stone dropped gently into still water. A bell, somewhere near the hermitage, struck once and then allowed to fade entirely on its own, without a second strike to hurry it along. She lay still for a moment, listening to the silence that followed it, which seemed, somehow, to be part of the sound as much as the ringing itself. When she rose and stepped outside, the morning was pale and soft, mist still clinging low to the bamboo grove, softening its green into something closer to grey. She found the source of the sound near the small garden at the side of the hermitage, an old bronze bell, no larger than 2 cupped hands, hanging from a low branch, still trembling faintly from Tenzin's touch. He stood before it with his palms pressed lightly together, eyes closed, not moving. He did not seem to be praying exactly, or if he was, it was a kind of praying that asked nothing of anyone, least of all whatever might be listening. Kaya waited a respectful distance away until his eyes opened. "Only once?" she asked, before she had quite decided to ask it. "Once is enough to be heard," he said. "A second strike is usually for the ringer, not for the morning."
Kaya considered this while the last of the sound finished dissolving into the mist. She found she rather liked the idea that a thing might be complete after only one honest attempt, that more was not always the same as better.
That morning, for the first time, she did not simply sit and watch him work. When he moved toward the garden with a small woven basket, she found herself following. And when he crouched to gather the last of the season's greens, she crouched beside him and began, without being asked, to do the same. He did not comment on this. He only shifted slightly to make room for her at the row, the way he had shifted on the stone by the river 2 nights before, and showed her, with a small gesture rather than a spoken instruction, which leaves were ready and which needed another day or 2 of sun. Her hands, she noticed, still remembered how to be useful. It had simply been a long while since anyone had needed them for something so small and unhurried as this. They worked mostly in silence, though it was a companionable silence now, less like the silence between strangers, and more like the silence between people who have already said the things that needed saying, and are content to let the rest of the morning simply happen around them. "You're good with your hands," Tenzin said eventually, examining a small bundle of greens she had gathered, none crushed, none torn carelessly from the stem. "I used to garden," Kaya said, "a long time ago, before..." She stopped herself there, the way a person stops at the edge of water they are not yet ready to step into. Tenzin did not press her to continue. He only nodded once, as if the unfinished sentence were itself a complete enough answer for the morning, and returned his attention to the row of greens in front of him. Kaya found, to her surprise, that she was grateful for the unfinished sentence being allowed to remain unfinished. There was no expectation pressing against it, no silence demanding to be filled. It could simply sit there, incomplete, the way the mist sat over the bamboo, thinning by degrees too small to notice in its own time and not before. When the basket was full, they carried it together back toward the small kitchen at the side of the hermitage, and Kaya, without quite planning to, found herself staying, helping to rinse the greens in a shallow stone basin, helping to lay out the morning's rice to steam, helping in small and unremarkable ways to turn the quiet tasks of the hermitage into something shared rather than something watched. It was not a large shift. No one announced it, least of all Kaya herself. But by the time the sun had fully burned the mist away from the bamboo grove, she noticed she had stopped thinking of herself as a guest waiting to be shown what to do, and had started instead simply doing the way a person does not decide one morning to belong somewhere, but only notices sometime later that they already have. At midday, Tenzin sat on the low step outside the kitchen, mending the same length of rope she had seen him working on the evening she arrived, still not yet finished, in no apparent hurry to be. Kaya sat near him, sorting a small pile of dried herbs into their proper jars, matching each by scent rather than by sight, the way he had shown her without quite showing her. Simply doing it himself, slowly, until her hands understood on their own. "How long have you lived here?" she asked,
after a long, comfortable quiet.
Sir, Tenzin considered the question the way he seemed to consider most things, unhurried, turning it over before answering, as if the answer itself deserved a moment of respect before being spoken. Long enough that the plum tree was only a sapling when I arrived, he said. It has outgrown me in most of the ways that matter.
Kecha looked toward the tree, its leaves now more gold than green, and tried to picture it small and unformed, the way she herself had once been small and unformed, in ways she was only now beginning to notice changing. Do you ever miss anywhere else? She asked. He was quiet for a while before answering, his hands still moving over the rope, patient and sure.
Sometimes, he said. But missing a place is not the same as needing to return to it. The missing passes through, like weather. It doesn't require me to do anything about it. Kaya turned this over slowly, the way she had turned over his words about the river the night before, feeling its shape without needing, yet, to fully understand it. The afternoon passed in small tasks and smaller silences. The herbs sorted, the rice cooled and shared between them from a single shallow bowl. The rope finally, quietly finished and coiled neatly beside the door. As evening approached and the light softened again toward amber, Kaya found herself reaching, without thinking, for the small bronze bell by the garden, running one finger lightly along its cool, curved edge. She did not strike it. It was not yet time, and some instinct told her the bell was not hers to ring. Not yet. Perhaps not for a long while. But she let her hand rest there a moment, feeling the faint, cool solidity of it beneath her palm, and thought, with something that felt almost like surprise, that she did not want to leave this place quite yet. Behind her, unseen, Tenzin watched her hand rest against the bell and said nothing at all, only turned back toward the kitchen where the evening's small tasks were waiting to be shared, once again, between the two of them. The wind changed sometime in the night, and by morning it carried a different weight to it. Cooler, drier, moving through the bamboo with a faint rattling sound that had not been there before. Aya noticed it first in the plum tree. She had taken to sitting beneath it in the mornings, after the bell and before the garden work began, simply to watch the light change across the clearing while the mist lifted. It had become, without her quite deciding it should, one of the small fixed points of her day. The tea, the bell, the tree, the river, each holding its place in the hours the way stones hold their place in a riverbed, worn smooth by repetition rather than force. That morning, as she sat with her back against the tree's rough trunk, a single leaf let go above her and drifted down, turning once, twice, before settling lightly on her knee. It was more gold than green now, edged in a soft, papery brown, curled slightly inward like a hand that had decided gently to stop reaching for something. She picked it up and turned it over in her fingers. There was nothing remarkable about it. It was only a leaf, one among thousands the tree would let go before winter fully arrived. And yet something in its small, unhurried fall settled into her chest with more weight than its size should have allowed. She thought, without quite meaning to, of a garden far from here, smaller, plainer, without a river running past it, without bamboo or bells or a hermitage of grey stone. A garden with a low wooden fence and a single fruit tree at its centre, and someone beside her, kneeling in the dirt the way she herself had knelt 2 mornings ago beside Tenzin, hands patient among the roots. She did not let the memory sharpen into anything more specific than that. It remained soft at its edges, the way the mist remained soft over the bamboo each morning. Present. Undeniably present, but not something she reached out to grasp more firmly. She'd learned, somewhere in her long walk up the mountain, that reaching too hard for a memory was a little like reaching too hard for water. It only slipped further from the hand that tried to close around it.
The leaf lay quiet in her palm. She let it stay there. When Tenzin came to sit beside her sometime later, a small woven basket in hand, he did not ask what she was thinking. He simply lowered himself onto the ground nearby, following her gaze up into the branches, where 3 or 4 more leaves trembled, loosely attached, waiting their own turn to fall. "They don't fight it," he said after a while, nodding up at the tree. "By the time a leaf lets go, it has already agreed to it. Somewhere inside itself, long before the wind ever asks." Kea turned the leaf over once more in her fingers. "It still looks a little sad," she said quietly. "Falling like that." Tenzin considered this, his eyes following another leaf as it spiraled down, unhurried, landing soundlessly in the grass a short distance away. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps it only looks that way from where we're sitting. The tree doesn't seem to grieve its leaves. It only grows new ones when it's time, in the same place the old ones used to be." Kea said nothing for a while. She let the words settle the way she had learned to let his words settle. Not immediately understood, not immediately accepted, but placed somewhere close enough that she might return to them later, the way one returns to a stone in a familiar river, worn a little smoother each time by the water passing over it. Above them, another leaf let go, and then another, drifting down in no particular hurry, following no particular pattern, each one finding its own quiet place in the grass below. She thought again briefly of the garden with the low wooden fence. She let herself wonder this time whether the fruit tree there had lost its leaves each autumn the same way, gently, without struggle, and whether she had ever once, in all the years she'd spent beside it, actually stopped to watch it happen. She did not think she had. She had always been doing something else in the autumns of that garden, hurrying towards some task, some plan, some next thing that had seemed at the time far more urgent than watching leaves fall from a tree that would only grow new ones again in spring. She wondered, with a small ache that was not quite sadness and not quite regret, but lived somewhere in the quiet space between the two, whether she might have missed a great many small things by always hurrying toward the larger ones. Tenzin, beside her, said nothing further. He simply reached into his basket and began sorting a handful of dried plums from the previous season, setting some aside, discarding others, his hands moving with the same unhurried patience they brought to everything: the tea, the rope, the garden rose. After a while, without quite planning to, Kaya reached out and helped him sort, her fingers finding the rhythm of it easily. The good fruit from the withered, the useful from the spent. It was small work. It asked very little of her, and yet doing it beside him, beneath the tree that was slowly, gently, letting go of its summer, she found the ache in her chest loosening by some small degree, not disappearing, not resolved, but loosening the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling against it and simply let your hands rest instead. The leaf she had first caught still lay in her lap. When the afternoon light began to shift toward gold, she rose and carried it with her toward the garden's edge, where a small collection of fallen leaves had gathered naturally against the base of a stone. She set it there among the others, without ceremony, the way Tenzin had lit the lantern that first evening, a small, ordinary gesture that asked nothing of anyone watching, least of all herself. Above her, the plum tree stood in the softening light, holding perhaps a third of its leaves still. Gold and green mingled together, in no hurry at all to finish what the season had already begun. Kaya looked up at it for a long moment, and then, for the first time since arriving at the hermitage, allowed herself to think, fully and without flinching away, of the person she had left behind in that other garden. Not the details, not the ache of it, but simply the shape of them, warm and familiar, held gently rather than gripped. The tree did not seem to mind holding this with her. It only swayed a little in the changing wind, its remaining leaves trembling faintly, patient, unhurried, entirely unafraid of what the coming winter would ask of it. The wind rose further that evening, sweeping down from somewhere higher on the mountain, carrying with it the first real edge of the coming season. Kaya felt it against her face as she crossed the clearing toward the hermitage's door, her arms full of the evening's last gathered greens. The bamboo bent further than she had yet seen it bend, leaning almost sideways in long sweeping curves before straightening again, over and over, patient even in this stronger wind, the way it had been patient in the faint, barely felt breezes of her first evenings here. She noticed as she stepped beneath the low eave of the doorway that the lantern was not lit. It was not late enough yet for full dark, but the light was fading quickly, and the small paper shade hung still and lightless against its post, swaying gently in the wind's push and pull. She stood a moment beneath it, uncertain, waiting to see whether Tenzin might appear to light it as he always did, unhurried, unremarkable. A small daily ritual she had come to expect the way she expected the bell each morning. He did not appear. She found him instead near the side of the hermitage, gathering in a length of drying cloth that had been strung between two posts, folding it calmly against the strengthening wind. He glanced up as she approached, and then toward the darkened lantern behind her, and did not seem at all troubled by what he saw. "The wind's too strong for it tonight," he said, tucking the folded cloth beneath one arm. "It would only gutter and die again the moment I lit it. Better to let it rest dark until the wind settles." Kaya looked back at the lantern, small and lightless against the deepening blue of the sky, and felt something in her chest tighten slightly at the sight of it. An old, familiar tightening, the kind she associated with things left undone, tasks unfinished, small disorders that seemed somehow to ask to be corrected. "Won't it feel strange?" she asked, walking back to a dark doorway. Tenzin considered this as he carried the folded cloth toward the drying shelf inside, setting it down with the same unhurried care he brought to everything. "For a night, perhaps," he said. "But the doorway is still there in the dark. So is the step. So is the door itself. The lantern only helps us see them a little sooner. It doesn't make them exist." Kaya followed him inside, setting the greens down near the small kitchen basin, turning his words over slowly in her mind. She thought of the leaf she had held 2 mornings before, and the tree's quiet acceptance of its own thinning branches, and wondered whether this, too, was some quieter version of the same lesson, though Tenzin, as always, offered nothing further to confirm or explain it. He simply moved on to the evening's other small tasks, setting water to warm, laying out the last of the rice, as though the unlit lantern outside required no more of his attention than it had already received.
Kia found, to her mild surprise, that the unlit lantern required a good deal more of hers.
She noticed it again as they ate their evening meal near the small hearth, glancing more than once toward the dark doorway, toward the place where warm light usually spilled across the earth outside. Its absence felt oddly loud to her, the way a missing sound sometimes feels louder than the sound itself. A held breath where a familiar exhale should have been. "Does it bother you?" she asked eventually. "When something you've always done doesn't get done?"
Tenzin set down his bowl and considered the question with his usual unhurried care. "Sometimes at first," he admitted. "The habit expects to be completed, the way water expects to keep flowing downhill. But the habit is not the same as the need. Most nights, the lantern is lit because it's pleasant, not because it's necessary. Tonight, it simply isn't pleasant to light it. That's all."
Kaya considered this while the fire settled lower beside them, its small light the only warm glow now in the darkening hermitage. She thought of all the things in her own life she had once treated as necessary, simply because she had always done them. Small habits, small routines, small lights she had lit each evening out of nothing more than the expectation that they ought to be lit, whether or not the wind that night called for it. She did not examine the thought too closely. She only let it rest there, the way she had learned to let his words rest, unhurried, unfinished, present without demanding to be resolved. Later, after the fire had been banked for the night and Tenzin had retired to his own quiet corner of the hermitage, Kaya stepped outside once more, drawn by some small restlessness she could not quite name. The wind had not fully settled, though it had eased somewhat from its earlier strength, moving now in long, slow gusts rather than the sharp, sideways bursts of before. The clearing lay mostly dark around her, lit only by the thin scatter of stars overhead and the faint, diffuse glow of a moon still low behind the ridge. She stood beneath the unlit lantern for a long moment, looking up at its still, dark shape swaying gently on its post. It did not, she found, feel as unsettling as she had expected it to. The doorway was still there, exactly as Tenzin had said. The step was still there. The plum tree stood its familiar shape against the deeper dark of the grove beyond, and the river, unseen but always present, continued its low, unbroken murmur somewhere beyond the clearing's edge, needing no lantern at all to keep speaking through the night.
She realized, standing there, that she had half expected the darkness to feel like loss. Instead, it felt more like a held breath before a return. Not empty, exactly, but simply waiting, patient. The way the plum tree waited each winter for a spring it did not need to hurry toward.
She reached out on some quiet impulse and touched the cool paper shade of the lantern, feeling its slight give beneath her fingers, its stillness in the settling wind. Tomorrow, she thought, the wind would likely calm, and Tenzin would light it again without ceremony, the same unremarkable ritual he had performed every evening since her arrival. And tonight, in its absence, The darkness had asked nothing more difficult of her than to stand quietly within it a while and notice that the world had not, in fact, come undone for want of a small flame. She returned to her room without lighting anything at all and lay down in a darkness that felt, for the first time in a long while, less like something missing and more like something simply resting, patient, unafraid, waiting only for the wind to settle in its own good time. Outside, the bamboo continued to lean and straighten, and the river went on with its long unbroken sentence beneath it all, and the lantern, unlit but not forgotten, swayed gently on its post through the remainder of the night, waiting, without complaint, for its evening to come again. The wind settled by the following evening, and the lantern was lit again without remark, as though it had never gone dark at all. Kaya noticed this, and noticed too that she did not need to say anything about it either.
That night's meal was simple, as most meals at the hermitage were. Rice, a little pickled root, a few strips of dried mushroom softened in the broth. Tenzin set the pot near the fire and gestured for Kaya to serve herself first, the way he always did, without ceremony. She filled her bowl the way she always filled it, to its edge, a little more than she likely needed. The old habit of her hand moving before her hunger had been properly consulted. It was not a large bowl, but she noticed, setting the ladle down, that she had filled it fully anyway, the way she always filled it fully, regardless of the size of her appetite that particular evening. Tenzin served himself after her. He took considerably less, perhaps half of what remained in the pot, though there was plenty left for a second helping if either of them wanted one. He did not measure this carefully, the way a person measures a portion out of discipline. He simply took what his hand reached for, which happened, this evening as most evenings, to be a modest amount, and then set the ladle back in the pot and began to eat. Kaya watched this without meaning to watch it closely. It was such a small, unremarkable thing, a bowl filled less than it might have been, and yet something about it caught in her attention, the way a single stone sometimes catches the eye in a riverbed full of similar stones. Without any clear reason why that one and not another, she ate her own meal slowly, as she had learned to do in her weeks here, though she noticed about halfway through the bowl a familiar fullness settling in her stomach. Not discomfort, only a quiet signal that the meal had already done what it needed to do. She noticed too an old reflex rising alongside that fullness, a faint sense that the bowl ought to be finished regardless, that leaving food behind was a kind of small failure, a debt left unpaid to whoever had prepared it, or grown it, or carried it up the mountain. She ate the rest anyway, out of habit rather than hunger, and felt afterward the particular heaviness that comes from eating past the point the body asked for. Tenzin, meanwhile, had finished his own smaller portion and sat back, his hands resting easily on his knees, his bowl empty but for a thin film of broth along its bottom edge. He did not reach for more. He simply sat, contentedly watching the fire, as though the meal had ended exactly where it needed to end, with nothing left over to feel uncertain about. "You never take very much," Kaya said, setting her own emptied bowl aside. "I take what I need," Tenzin said simply. "Sometimes that's more. Tonight it was this much." Kaya considered this, turning it over the way she turned over most things now. Not urgently,
only curiously, the way one turns over a stone to see what might be resting beneath it. "I always fill mine all the way," she said, half to herself, "even when I'm not sure I want that much." Tenzin nodded, unsurprised, and said nothing further about it. No correction offered, no small teaching attached. He only rose to set the pot aside for the morning, leaving the observation to sit in the quiet between them, unfinished, the way he so often left things unfinished, trusting them to continue their own slow work without his help. The following evening, without deciding to make any particular point of it, Kaya filled her bowl a little less full. She noticed the emptiness at the bowl's upper rim, a small gap of air where rice might otherwise have been, and found to her mild surprise that the sight of it did not trouble her the way she might have expected. It did not look like lack. It only looked like enough, sitting quietly within its own modest boundary, needing nothing further added to complete it. She ate slowly and finished the bowl entirely this time, and felt afterward none of the old heaviness that so often followed her meals. Only a plain, ordinary satisfaction, the simple, unremarkable feeling of having had exactly what she needed, and nothing more. She did not mention this to Tenzin. It did not feel like something that needed mentioning. It felt instead like something small and private that had simply arrived on its own, the way the lantern's flame arrived each evening once the wind allowed it. Not announced, not celebrated, only present quietly, doing the small work it had always been capable of doing. Outside, the night settled in around the hermitage, cold and clear, the last of the season's warmth retreating further each evening toward whatever winter was gathering itself, somewhere beyond the ridge, to bring. Kaya sat a while longer by the dying fire, her bowl empty and light in her lap, and thought, without any particular urgency attached to the thought, that perhaps not every emptiness was something to be filled all the way to its edge. Some emptiness, she was beginning to suspect, was simply the correct shape for the moment it belonged to, needing nothing more poured into it than exactly what would be used. The wind that had troubled the lantern the night before spent itself by morning, and in its place came rain, soft at first, then steady, settling over the valley sometime before dawn and showing no particular hurry to leave. Kaya woke to the sound of it on the wooden roof above her, a low, even patter, thousands of small taps arriving and fading, blending together into something closer to a single continuous hush than any one sound she could separate out. She lay still for a long while, just listening, in no rush to rise, feeling the particular kind of stillness that rain seems to press down over a place, softening its edges, quieting its distances, drawing the whole of the valley a little closer in around itself. When she finally rose, she found the clearing transformed. The bamboo grove stood grey and glistening, each leaf holding a small, trembling bead of water at its tip, occasionally letting go and falling to join the others already gathered in the wet grass below. The plum tree's remaining leaves hung heavier now, dark with moisture, releasing every so often with a soft, wet sound, quite unlike their dry, papery falling in fairer weather. The river, when she could hear it beneath the rain, sounded fuller than before, swollen faintly with the morning's water, its low murmur deepened by half a tone, though its pace remained as unhurried as ever. There was no bell that morning. The rain, she supposed, made ringing it feel unnecessary. The whole valley already humming with its own soft, continuous sound, needing no single note to mark the day's beginning. She found Tenzin inside, near the small hearth, feeding it carefully with dry wood kept beneath a covered shelf for exactly such mornings. The fire's small warmth pushed back gently against the rain's chill, and steam rose from the kettle he had already set to heat, curling upward to join the damp grey air near the ceiling beams. "No garden today," he said by way of greeting, glancing toward the rain-soaked rows visible through the open doorway. "The greens won't mind waiting a day for drier hands to gather them." Kaya settled near the fire, drawing a blanket around her shoulders, listening to the rain's steady percussion on the roof above. "What do you do on days like this?" she asked. Tenzin considered the question as he poured the first of the morning's tea, slow as always, the water falling in its thin, unbroken thread from kettle to cup. "Less," he said simply. "The rain already does most of what needs doing. It waters the garden. It fills the river. It washes the dust from the leaves. There isn't much left for me to add to that." Kaya accepted her cup with both hands, feeling its warmth spread into her palms, and looked out at the rain falling steadily beyond the doorway, silvering the air between the hermitage and the grove. They spent the morning in small, unhurried tasks suited to indoor hours, mending a torn seam in a spare robe, sorting through a chest of old cloth for pieces still useful, refilling the small clay jars of dried herbs from the previous day's sorting. Tenzin moved through each task the way he moved through everything, without any sense that the rain outside had interrupted his day, so much as simply redirected it, the way a river redirects itself gently around a stone rather than stopping to argue with it. At midday, they ate a simple meal of rice and warmed vegetables near the hearth, listening to the rain's rhythm shift occasionally, softer for a while, then heavier, then softer again, never quite settling into any single unchanging pace, and yet never once feeling erratic either. It simply arrived the way it wished to arrive, and Kaya found herself, somewhere in the quiet of the meal, no longer minding the greyness of the day at all. If anything, she thought, there was a kind of permission in it, a permission to do less, to want less, to simply exist within the day rather than push against its shape. In the afternoon, Tenzin brought out a small stringed instrument she had not yet seen him play. Plain wood, a little worn at the neck, 3 strings instead of the many she vaguely remembered from performances long ago, in some other life, some louder place. He did not announce that he would play it. He simply began softly, a slow melody that seemed to move at exactly the same pace as the rain outside, neither hurrying to meet it nor lagging behind it, but existing alongside it, the way 2 old friends might walk together without needing to match each other's stride exactly. Kaya closed her eyes and listened, the rain and the strings weaving together into something she could not quite separate into 2 distinct sounds anymore. She thought distantly of music she used to know, songs with clear beginnings and clear endings, verses building toward choruses, choruses building toward some final, satisfying close. This was nothing like that. It simply continued, formless in the way clouds are formless, drifting from one soft phrase into another without any visible seam, and when it finally faded, she could not have said exactly when it had ended, only that at some point the rain alone remained, and that this, too, felt complete. "Where did you learn that?" she asked quietly, once the last note had settled fully into silence. "An old teacher? Long ago?" Tenzin said, setting the instrument carefully aside. "He told me the melody wasn't really his to keep either. Just something passing through his hands for a while. The way the water passes through the river." Kaya looked toward the rain-blurred window, turning the words over slowly, the way she had turned over so many of his words in the days since her arrival, not needing to fully grasp them right away, only needing to hold them a while, gently, and let them settle wherever in her they were meant to settle. By evening, the rain had softened further still, reduced now to a light, scattered patter, more mist than downpour, drifting rather than falling. The clearing outside had taken on a hushed, silver quality in the fading light, every surface holding some small remnant of the day's water. The bamboo leaves, the plum tree's bark, the low stone step outside the door, all of it gleaming faintly, quietly, in the day's last grey light. Kaya sat a while longer near the dying fire, listening to the rain's gentle remainder against the roof, feeling a stillness in her chest that had not been there before. Not an absence of feeling, but something closer to feeling settled, the way water settles once it has finally found its own level, no longer straining upward or spilling over, simply resting at exactly the height it was always meant to reach. When she finally rose to retire for the night, Tenzin was already banking the fire's last embers, his movements slow and certain in the dim light. "Thank you," Kaya said, though she could not have said precisely what she was thanking him for. The tea, the music, the permission to do less, or simply the rain itself, and the quiet way he had let it be enough. Tenzin only nodded the way he always did and said nothing more. And outside, the rain continued its soft, unhurried whisper against the world, needing no thanks at all for the small, patient gift of its falling. By the next evening, the rain had passed entirely, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and unusually clear, deep blue fading to violet at its edges as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The air held a fresh, washed smell, wet stone, damp earth, the faint green scent of bamboo still shedding the last of the day's moisture. Kaya and Tenzin sat that evening on the flat stones near the river, the water running fuller and faster than it had before the rain, though its voice remained as unhurried as ever, simply louder now, fuller, the way a familiar song sounds richer when more instruments join it. They had fallen into a comfortable habit these evenings by the water. Kaya no longer felt the need to fill every silence with a question, and Tenzin no longer seemed surprised to find her already seated on her usual stone by the time he arrived. Tonight, though, after a long stretch of easy quiet, he spoke without her prompting him to. "There was an old fisherman," he said, "who lived some distance from here, along a wider river than this one, many years before I came to this valley." Kaya turned toward him slightly, sensing something different in the shape of his voice. Not quite a lesson, not quite a memory. Something closer to a story being handed carefully across a distance, the way one hands across a bowl that might still be warm, He fished the same stretch of river every morning of his life, Tenzin continued, at the same bend, beneath the same leaning willow, using the same worn net his father had used before him. Some mornings, the river gave him more fish than he could carry home. Other mornings, it gave him almost nothing at all. A few small, silver things barely worth the walk. He paused, watching the current move over the stones in front of them, dark and swift in the evening light. For many years, he said, the fisherman grieved the empty mornings and celebrated the full ones, as though the river owed him one and had merely misplaced the other. He grew tired in a way that had little to do with the casting of nets and much to do with the counting of them. Full days weighed against empty ones, a ledger he carried everywhere, even when he wasn't fishing at all. Kaya listened, watching the water for herself now, feeling the shape of the story settle into the evening, the way mist settles into a low field, without hurry, without effort. One morning, Tenzin went on, an old woman came to sit near him on the bank, though she did not fish and did not seem to want anything from him at all. She simply watched the water for a long while, and then she said, "You fish the same river every day, and yet you seem surprised each morning by what it gives you."
The fisherman told her that of course he was surprised. The river gave differently every day. Some days generous, some days cruel. The old woman only shook her head. "The river isn't generous or cruel," she said. "It only ever gives what it happens to be carrying that morning. You're the one deciding afterward whether that was a kindness or an insult." Tenzin fell quiet for a moment, letting the current fill the space where his voice had been. The fisherman didn't understand her right away. He continued eventually. He went on fishing the same stretch, under the same willow, for a good while longer, still counting his mornings the old way. But something in her words stayed with him, the way a single stone stays lodged in a shoe, long after the walk that put it there is finished. And slowly, not suddenly, not all at once, he noticed himself counting a little less, noticing the light on the water a little more, noticing the sound of the current beneath his net, whether or not that morning's net came up full.
Did he ever stop counting entirely? Kaya asked quietly, when it seemed the story had reached some kind of resting place. Tenzin considered this, watching the swollen river move past them in the deepening blue light. "I don't know," he admitted. "The story doesn't say. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he only counted less. And that was enough of a change to notice. Stories don't always finish the way we'd like them to. Sometimes they simply stop where the telling runs out. The same way a river simply continues past the point where we happen to stop watching it." Kaya sat with this for a long while, the story settling into her the way so many of Tenzin's words had settled these past days, not fully understood, not entirely resolved, but present, held gently, allowed to remain exactly as unfinished as it needed to be. She thought distantly of her own counting, all the mornings she had weighed against each other in that other life, full days set against empty ones, though she could no longer quite recall, sitting here by this different river, what exactly she had been measuring, or why the ledger had ever felt so urgent to keep balanced. "Why did you tell me that story tonight?"
she asked, though she suspected, even as she asked it, that there might not be a clean answer waiting for her. That the question itself might be a little like asking why the rain had chosen to fall on this particular evening rather than another. Tenzin was quiet for a moment, watching the last color drain slowly from the sky above the ridge. "No particular reason," he said. "The river reminded me of it. That's all. Not every story needs a reason for the telling. Sometimes it only needs a river close by, and someone willing to sit and listen."
Kia smiled faintly at that, feeling something in her chest loosen a fraction further. Not the whole knot, not all at once, but some small portion of it. The way a single leaf lets go from a branch that will hold on to many others still, for a while longer yet. They sat together in silence after that, the story settling into the dark the way all the evening's other sounds had settled. The river's fuller voice, the last few drops falling from wet bamboo leaves somewhere behind them, an owl calling once, softly, into the deepening night. When they finally rose to return to the hermitage, Kaya found she was still turning the fisherman's story over in her mind, gently, without urgency, the way one turns a smooth stone over in a pocket long after the river that shaped it has been left behind. She did not try to force it into a lesson. She only let it walk beside her, quiet and unfinished, all the way back up the path toward the lantern's small, steady light, glowing warm and low beside the darkened door. The mornings had grown cooler by then, each one arriving a little later than the one before, the light taking its time to climb fully over the ridge. Kaya woke one such morning before the bell, lying still beneath her blanket, listening to the hush that came just before it, the bamboo not yet stirring, the river's voice muffled slightly by the season's first heavier mist, the whole valley holding itself in a kind of suspended quiet, as though gathering its breath before the day properly began. Then the bell rang, once, round and low, spreading outward through the mist the way it always spread, fading by degrees too gradual to mark any single moment as its true ending. Ordinarily, Kaya rose at the sound. This morning she did not. She lay still instead, listening to what came after it. At first, there seemed to be nothing there at all. Only silence, plain and empty. The kind of silence a person walks past 100 times a day, without noticing it has any texture of its own. But she kept listening, the way Tenzin so often simply sat and listened to the river without needing anything more from it than its plain presence. And slowly, the silence after the bell began to seem less empty than she had first assumed. There was the faint, distant murmur of the river beneath it. There was the soft, irregular creak of the hermitage settling into the morning's cold. There was her own breath, slow and even, filling and emptying, a small rhythm running quietly beneath everything else. The silence, she realized, was not an absence at all. It was simply full of smaller things than the bell had been, things ordinarily too quiet to notice, until the larger sound had cleared enough space for them to be heard. She rose eventually, dressed, and made her way to the garden, where Tenzin stood near the small bronze bell, his hand still lowered from having struck it, his eyes closed, unmoving. She did not disturb him. She had learned in her weeks here that this brief stillness after the bell was its own small ritual,
as deliberate in its way as the striking itself, though Tenzin had never once described it to her as a ritual, and would likely, she suspected, have simply called it waiting. When his eyes opened, she found herself asking, "What are you listening for after it rings?" Tenzin considered the question, glancing once more toward the bell, now fully still, its bronze surface catching a thin, cool edge of morning light. "Nothing in particular," he said. "Only what's left, once the ringing is finished." Kaya nodded slowly, thinking of her own silence that morning. Still lying in bed, still full of small things she had not expected to find there. They worked together in the garden for a while, gathering the last hardy greens the frost had not yet claimed. And Kaya found herself listening differently to the rest of the morning's ordinary sounds. The soft scrape of Tenzin's trowel in the cold earth, the brief rustle of a bird passing low through the bamboo, the long pause between each, full in its own quiet way, holding its own small weight, though it asked nothing of her attention to notice it. Later, sitting by the river in the fading afternoon light, she tried it again, waiting after the water's low murmur seemed briefly, in some trick of the current, to soften almost to nothing, listening for what lived in that thin, quiet gap before the sound gathered itself and continued. She found each time some small texture there, the faint creak of a branch somewhere behind her, the whisper of her own breath, the distant, muffled call of a bird she could not identify. It occurred to her, watching the current resume its fuller voice after each brief lull, that she had spent a great deal of her life listening only for the loud things, the arrivals, the departures, the clear beginnings and endings of days and seasons and people. She had rarely thought to listen for what filled the spaces between them, the quiet intervals she had always assumed, without quite examining the assumption, to be simply empty. She was not certain, sitting there in the softening light, that they had ever truly been empty at all. Tenzin arrived some time later, lowering himself onto his usual stone without disturbing her thoughts, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. The river ran on, rising and softening, each small lull followed by its fuller return, and Kaya found herself listening to both in equal measure now, the sound and what lived quietly within its absence, neither one asking to be preferred over the other. When the light finally faded fully toward evening, they rose together and walked back in their usual comfortable silence, and Kaya noticed, climbing the last stretch of path toward the lantern's waiting glow, that the quiet between their footsteps felt, for the first time she could recall, every bit as full as the footsteps themselves. Some days pass without much happening at all, and yet something in them shifts anyway. Quietly, the way a room's temperature can change entirely while no one is looking directly at the window. It was several evenings later, the season tilting further now toward the cool, bare edge of autumn, when Kaya found herself back on the flat stones by the river alone, having arrived there before Tenzin, for once, rather than after him. The water ran dark and steady in the dusk light, its surface catching the last thin traces of gold from a sun already sunk behind the ridge. She had not planned to speak. She rarely planned her words with Tenzin anymore. They simply arrived when they arrived, the way the leaves arrived at the base of the plum tree in their own unhurried time.
But that evening, sitting alone with the river's low voice filling the space where a person might otherwise have been, she found the words rising anyway, quiet and unbidden, the way water rises in a cup poured a little too full. "I had a garden," she said softly, to no one in particular, since no one else had yet arrived to hear it. "Before I came here, a small one, with a fence that always needed mending, and one fruit tree that never quite gave enough shade in summer." She paused, watching the current move over a smooth grey stone near the bank, parting gently around it and rejoining just as gently on the other side, never once disturbed by the small obstacle in its path. "There was someone there with me," she continued, her voice still soft, still unhurried. "For a long time. Long enough that I stopped noticing the shape of the days we shared, the way you stop noticing a sound that's always present. And then, one season, they weren't there anymore."
She did not say how or why or when exactly the garden had gone quiet around her. She found, sitting there by the water, that these details did not feel necessary to hand across. Not to the river, and not, she suspected, to herself either. It was enough somehow to simply say the shape of it aloud, the way Tenzin had once said, the shape of his fisherman's story, without needing every edge of it sharpened into fact. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps on the path and did not turn. Tenzin lowered himself onto his usual stone beside her, saying nothing, asking nothing, simply arriving the way the evening itself had arrived, quietly and exactly on time.
"I used to hurry through the autumns," Kaya said after a while, not entirely sure if she was speaking to him now, or still simply speaking to the river. There was always some next thing waiting, some task, some plan. "I don't think I ever once sat and watched our tree lose its leaves the way I've watched your plum tree lose its." Tenzin was quiet, watching the water with her, and did not fill the silence with anything meant to comfort or correct her. He simply let it stand, wide and unhurried, the way the river itself stood wide and unhurried between its two dark banks. "I think I've been carrying the empty garden," Kaya said finally, "the way that fisherman carried his ledger, counting all the mornings it gave me nothing, without ever once counting the ones it gave me. Everything." "And now?" Tenzin asked, his voice as soft as the current beneath them. Kaya considered the question honestly, turning it over the way she had learned to turn over all of his questions, without rushing toward an answer that wasn't fully ready yet. "Now I think I'd like to stop counting so carefully," she said. "I don't know if I can, but I'd like to." Tenzin nodded slowly, his eyes still on the water. "The wanting is usually where it begins," he said. "Not the doing. The doing comes later, quietly, the way the tree grows new leaves without ever announcing the day it started." Kaya felt something ease in her chest at these words. Not a resolution, not a sudden lightness, but something closer to permission. Permission to have carried what she'd carried. Permission too to begin, slowly, setting some small portion of it down, the way one sets down a heavy basket at the end of a long walk. Not because the walk is finished, but simply because it is time, for a while, to rest. She looked toward the water, dark now beneath the fully fallen night and thought of the garden one last time that evening, not with the ache she had carried up the mountain, but with something softer, gentler, closer to gratitude than to grief. "Thank you for listening," she said, though she was not entirely sure whether she meant the words for Tenzin, or for the river, or for both of them together, sitting quietly on either side of her in the dark. Tenzin only inclined his head slightly, the smallest of gestures, and said nothing further. The river, for its part, said what it always said, the same low, patient, unbroken sentence it had been speaking since long before Kaya arrived, and would go on speaking long after she left, indifferent to the weight of any single evening's confession. And yet somehow, in its indifference, entirely large enough to hold it. They sat together a while longer, until the last warmth left the stones beneath them, and the cold of the clear night began pressing gently against their sleeves. Then, without needing to discuss it, they rose together and made their way back up the dark path, side by side, the lantern's small glow waiting for them at the top of the rise, warm and steady against the deepening chill. Kaya slept deeply that night, the river's voice threading faintly through her dreams, carrying nothing in particular, asking nothing in return, simply continuing the way it always continued, patient and whole, beneath everything else that came and went above it. The clouds cleared entirely some nights later, and with them came a stillness so complete that even the bamboo seemed to hold its breath. Kaya noticed it first as she stepped outside after the evening meal, the air unusually calm, unusually clear, the kind of stillness that seems to settle over a valley only a handful of times each season, as if the sky itself had decided, for one night, to stop moving and simply watch. Above the ridge, the moon had risen full and bright, nearly white against the deep indigo of the sky, its light strong enough to throw faint shadows across the clearing. The plum tree's bare-edged silhouette, the lantern post, the low stone step where she so often sat. She made her way down to the river without needing to ask whether Tenzin would be there. Some evenings he was. Tonight she found herself alone at first, and did not mind it. The moonlight was enough company, spilling silver across the water's surface, so bright and unbroken that for a moment the whole river seemed to be made of nothing but light. She sat on her usual stone and watched it. The moon's reflection lay directly ahead of her, a long, wavering column of white stretching from the far bank almost to her feet, trembling faintly wherever the current moved a little faster over a hidden stone beneath. Further out, where the water ran smoother, the reflection nearly steadied, not quite still, never quite still, but close enough to stillness that she found herself holding her own breath slightly, as if her breathing alone might be enough to disturb it. A small gust moved through, barely a breath of wind, and the surface rippled. The moon's reflection scattered instantly, breaking into a dozen small trembling pieces, silver shards scattered across the dark water, no longer one whole shape but many restless fragments, drifting apart from each other in the widening ripple. Some old part of her wanted to reach out, absurdly, as though her hand alone might smooth the water back into stillness and gather the moon's reflection back into one unbroken piece again. It was the same old reflex, she realized, the reflex that wanted gardens to keep their fences mended,
wanted mornings to be counted evenly against each other, wanted every broken thing set right again as quickly as possible, before the wrongness of its breaking could be fully felt. She did not reach out, she only watched, and within a few slow breaths, the wind passed, and the water stilled again, and the moon's reflection gathered itself back, not because she had done anything to help it, not because it had ever truly needed her help at all, but simply because that is what still water does. Once whatever disturbed it has moved on, another gust came, a little stronger this time, and again the reflection broke apart, scattering into brighter, wider fragments across a wider ripple. And again, without her doing anything at all, the water settled, and the moon reassembled itself, whole and calm. Exactly as it had been before, she noticed something, sitting there, that she had not quite noticed in all her evenings by this river so far. The moon itself had never moved. It hung exactly where it had always hung, high and steady above the ridge, untouched by any of the water's restlessness below it. It was only the water that had been disturbed, only the water that had scattered and reformed, scattered and reformed, again and again, while the moon itself simply continued, whole, indifferent to whether the river below it chose to hold its reflection steady or not. The moon had never been broken, only the water had moved. She sat with that thought for a long while, turning it gently, the way she had learned to turn all of Tenzin's small offerings, not grasping for its full meaning all at once, only letting it settle, layer by layer, the way silt settles slowly to the bottom of still water after a current has passed through. She thought distantly of the ache she had carried up the mountain those weeks before, how fiercely she had wanted at first to smooth it away entirely, to still the water forever so that nothing could ever scatter its surface again. She understood now, watching the reflection break and reform, that this had never quite been possible, and perhaps had never needed to be. The ache would come. The wind would rise, some evenings, from directions she could not always predict, and the water would scatter, briefly, into restless fragments of old memory and old grief. But the moon itself, whatever steady, whole thing, lived beneath the ache, beneath the counting, beneath the old garden and its low mended fence that had never actually broken at all. It had only ever looked broken from where she happened to be sitting. In the moment the wind happened to be passing through, she heard soft footsteps on the path behind her and did not need to turn to know Tenzin had arrived. He lowered himself onto his usual stone without a word, and together they watched the water for a long while, the moon's reflection scattering and reforming above the current, again and again, patient as breathing. "It never really breaks, does it?" Kaya said eventually, more to herself than to him. Tenzin followed her gaze to the water and said nothing for a moment, only watching the light gather and scatter in its own unhurried rhythm. "No," he agreed softly, "only the water moves." They sat together in the moon's bright, borrowed light a long while after that, saying very little else, needing very little else, the river running on beneath them, whole and unbroken, no matter how many times its surface chose, for a passing moment, to look otherwise. A little downstream from the hermitage,
where the river narrowed slightly between two low banks. An old wooden footbridge crossed from one side to the other. Kaya had noticed it on her first evening, glimpsed briefly through the bamboo as she'd followed the sound of the water toward the hermitage, though she had not crossed it since. There had never been a particular reason to. The garden, the kitchen, the flat stones where she sat with Tenzin in the evenings, all of it lay on this side of the river, and she had simply had no cause to visit whatever lay on the other. That afternoon, gathering wild greens along the bank a little further than usual, she found herself standing at the bridge's near end without quite remembering deciding to walk there. It was a plain thing, unremarkable in the way most useful objects in the valley seem to be. Two thick, weathered planks laid side by side, worn smooth and grey by years of weather, supported by a simple frame of timber sunk into the banks on either side. A low rope served as a rail on one side only, slack in places, tied off around a post that had gone silver with age. Moss grew along the underside of the planks, close to the water where the sun rarely reached. She stepped onto it. The wood gave slightly beneath her weight, a familiar creak, and the river moved beneath her, faster here where the banks pressed closer together, the water darker and more urgent in its narrowed channel. She paused near the middle, resting one hand lightly on the rope rail, and looked down. The current here caught the afternoon light in quick, scattered flashes, breaking and reforming too fast for her eye to follow any single ripple for more than a moment. It was a busier stretch of water than the wide, calm pool near the flat stones, where she usually sat with Tenzin in the evenings. She noticed she was not gripping the rope. Her hand rested against it lightly, the way a hand rests against a table it does not expect to need for balance, and she realized, with a small, quiet surprise, that her feet felt entirely steady on the worn planks beneath her. Steadier, in fact, than she remembered them feeling on the wider, better-built bridges of the towns she had passed through on her long walk up the mountain weeks before, back when every crossing had seemed to require some private effort of will just to complete. She did not examine this steadiness closely. It was not the kind of thing that seemed to want close examination. She only noticed it the way one notices, in passing, that a once stiff joint has quietly stopped aching, without any memory of the exact day the ache first eased. On the far side, the bank rose gently into a stand of taller trees she did not recognize. Not bamboo, but something broader leafed, its canopy beginning to thin with the season, scattering coins of afternoon light across a forest floor she had never yet walked. A narrow trail led further up, disappearing around a shoulder of rock, towards some part of the mountain she had not explored in all her weeks at the hermitage. She did not follow it that day. There was no urgency in the wanting. She simply stood a while longer at the crest of the bridge, feeling the current move beneath the worn planks, watching the light scatter and reform on the water's busier surface, and then turned, unhurried, and made her way back the way she had come. Tenzin was in the garden when she returned, gathering the last of the season's roots from beds nearly emptied now by the turning weather. He glanced up as she approached, her basket of wild greens still only half full. "There's a bridge downstream," she said, more as an observation than an announcement. "I don't think I'd crossed it before." "No," Tenzin agreed simply, returning his attention to the roots in front of him. There wasn't any need to before. She was not sure afterward whether he had meant anything particular by this.
or whether it was simply a plain statement of fact, the way he so often spoke. Noticing what was true, and saying only that much, and no more. She did not ask him to clarify. She knelt beside him instead and resumed her own work, sorting the roots he had already gathered, her hands moving with the easy familiarity of weeks of practice now, needing no instruction at all. That evening, after the meal was finished and the fire banked low, Kaya found herself thinking of the bridge again, not with any particular weight attached to the thought, only turning it over lightly, the way she turned over most things now, letting it rest in her mind without demanding. It means something larger than what it plainly was. It had simply been a bridge, old planks, a slack rope, a faster stretch of water beneath it, a stand of unfamiliar trees on the other side. She had crossed it and returned, and neither crossing had asked anything difficult of her at all. And yet, lying in her small room, later that night, listening to the river's voice carrying faintly through the walls, she noticed, without quite reaching for the noticing, the way a person sometimes notices, only after the fact, that a held breath has already been released, that she had crossed it without once thinking, even briefly, of turning back. She did not know when that particular ease had arrived in her, or on which of the many quiet evenings since her arrival it might have first taken root. She only knew, drifting towards sleep with the river's sound folding gently around her thoughts, that some old tightness which had once accompanied every crossing, every threshold, every uncertain step onto unfamiliar ground, had gone quiet somewhere along the way, so quietly that she had not even marked the moment of its leaving. Outside, the bridge stood exactly as it always stood, plain and worn and unremarkable, holding its place across the narrowed water, asking nothing of anyone who happened to cross it, and offering in return exactly that, away from one bank to the other, for anyone ready to take it. The mist arrived thickly one morning, sometime in the last stretch of true autumn, before the season had yet fully surrendered to the cold that would soon follow it. Kaya noticed it the moment she stepped outside, the clearing reduced to a soft, pale grey, the plum tree's bare upper branches dissolved almost entirely into the haze, the bamboo grove nothing more than a suggestion of shape a short distance away, its usual definite green swallowed into something formless and pale. Even the sound of the river seemed muffled by it, its low murmur arriving from a direction she could not immediately place, as though the mist had gathered up the valley's usual certainties and quietly tucked them away somewhere out of sight. She had walked the path to the garden 100 times by now, and the path to the river nearly as often, and yet, standing there that morning, she found she could see no more than a few paces ahead in any direction, the world reduced to a small, pale circle around her, its edges dissolving into a soft nothing that gave no hint of what lay just beyond it. An old unease rose in her, faint but familiar, the same unease she recognized that used to accompany her into any unfamiliar room, any unclear plan, any morning where the day ahead refused to announce its shape clearly in advance. It was the unease of not being able to see where her feet were about to land. She stood a moment at the edge of the mist, waiting for it to thin, the way she might once have waited, back in her old life, for a clear enough answer before she allowed herself to move at all. It did not thin. If anything, it seemed to settle further, drifting low and soft across the clearing, catching in pale wisps along the fence and the bare plum branches. She stepped forward anyway,
Her feet found the familiar packed earth of the garden path without difficulty, the shape of it worn into memory now after so many mornings of walking it. She did not need to see the path clearly to know it was there. Her feet already knew where the ground dipped slightly near the old stone, where it firmed again past the low fence post, where it curved gently toward the garden's near edge. She walked on, deeper into the pale hush, and found that a strange, quiet ease had settled over her. Not because the mist had cleared, and not because she could suddenly see any further than before, but simply because some part of her trusted, without needing to examine the trust too closely, that the path beneath her had not changed simply because the mist had made it harder to see. She reached the garden without difficulty and found Tenzin already there, a pale shape resolving slowly out of the haze as she drew closer, kneeling by the last of the season's roots, entirely unbothered, it seemed, by the mist pressing close around him. "Thick this morning," she said, more as a simple observation than a complaint. "It will lift by midday," Tenzin said, not looking up from his work. "It usually does." Kaya knelt beside him, her hands finding the familiar rhythm of the work without needing her eyes to guide them fully, and thought, working quietly beside him in the pale, formless morning, that there was something almost restful in not being able to see very far ahead. It asked nothing more of her than to attend to the small patch of ground directly in front of her, this root, this handful of soil, this next small task, without the added weight of needing to see the whole garden laid out clearly all at once. Later, walking to the river alone, she found the mist thicker still along the water's edge, curling low over the current, blurring the far bank into a pale absence. She sat on her usual stone regardless, listening to the muffled murmur of water she could not fully see, trusting the way her feet had trusted the garden path, that the river continued exactly as it always continued, whether or not the mist allowed her to watch it doing so. By midday, exactly as Tenzin had said, the mist began to thin, first in patches, revealing a stretch of bamboo here, a corner of the garden fence there, and then more fully, the pale haze lifting and dissolving into ordinary autumn light, the valley resuming its familiar, definite shapes, as though it had never once been hidden at all. Kaya stood in the clearing and watched the last wisps of mist retreat toward the higher ridge, and thought, with a quiet, unremarkable certainty, that she had walked the whole morning through without once needing to see clearly where her next step would land. She had simply walked, trusting ground she had walked many times before, and the ground, exactly as it always had been there to meet her. The first snow came quietly in the night, without any warning the evening before had offered. Kaya woke to a stillness deeper than usual. No rain on the roof, no wind through the bamboo, only a hush so complete it seemed to press gently against the walls of her small room. When she stepped outside, the world had changed. Snow lay thin and even across the clearing, softening every edge it touched. The garden rose, empty now of anything left to gather, wore a smooth white blanket, unbroken except for a single line of small bird tracks near the fence. The plum tree stood bare at last, its last leaves surrendered sometime in the recent nights, its dark branches traced now in white, delicate as thread. The bamboo bent low under the unfamiliar weight, pale green against paler white, occasionally releasing a small soft weight of snow that slid from one leaf to the next before falling silently into the drifts below. The river alone remained unchanged, dark and moving between its snow-covered banks, steam rising faintly where its warmer water met the colder air, a long black ribbon threading through a world gone suddenly, entirely white. Kaya stood in the doorway for a long while, simply looking. Tenzin was already at the hearth when she turned back inside, feeding the fire a little more generously than usual, the flames catching orange against the pale grey morning light through the window. He glanced up as she entered, said nothing about the snow at all, and only gestured toward the kettle already beginning to warm. They ate that morning close to the fire, wrapped in extra layers, the tea a little stronger than usual, a little more welcome for it. Outside, snow continued to fall in slow, scattered flakes, drifting rather than falling, settling without hurry onto branches already carrying as much weight as they could hold. Later, Kaya walked alone to the bell in the garden, brushing a small cap of snow from its curved bronze shoulder before it was struck for the morning. The sound, when it came, seemed rounder somehow in the snow-hushed air, spreading further before fading, swallowed at last by the softness all around it.
She walked too to the bridge downstream, her footprints the first to mark the untouched snow along the path. The narrowed water ran black and swift beneath the white-capped rail, steam curling faintly from its surface where it touched the freezing air. She stood at the center a while, watching her breath cloud in front of her, watching the far bank's bare trees stand silent and patient under their new white weight. She did not cross that day. She only stood and looked, and let the cold settle against her face without minding it, and then turned back toward the warmth of the hearth waiting for her on the other side. In the afternoon, she sat with Tenzin near the fire while he worked a small piece of wood into some shape she could not yet identify, his knife moving slow and unhurried, shavings curling to the floor in pale ribbons. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The fire popped softly. Outside, the snow continued its silent work, deepening by degrees too small to watch happening, the way all the valley's changes seemed to arrive. Not suddenly, but gathered, quietly, moment upon moment, until one looked up and found the whole world altered. Near evening, the snow eased, and a pale, cold light broke briefly through the clouds, catching the white clearing in a soft, silver glow. Kaya stepped outside once more, alone, and stood beneath the bare plum tree, looking up at its snow-traced branches against the thinning grey sky. She thought of nothing in particular. She only stood, breathing the cold, clean air, watching a single unmelted flake rest on the back of her hand until it slowly disappeared, and then went back inside, where the fire was waiting, and the tea was warm, and the evening settled slowly around the hermitage, the way snow settles around a stone, without sound, without hurry, simply covering what was there before with something new and equally quiet. A hard wind rose in the night, some days after the first snow, rattling the shutters and bending the bamboo low under its combined weight of ice and air. By morning it had passed, leaving behind the particular hush that follows any strong wind, the world holding unusually still, as if a little stunned by its own recent noise. Kaya found the branch on her way to the garden. It had come down from one of the taller trees across the river, a heavy limb as thick as her arm,
carried somehow by the wind all the way to this side of the water and dropped squarely across the middle of the familiar path, its broken end pale and splintered, its far end still trailing a few stubborn brown leaves that had refused, all autumn, to let go on their own. She stood before it a moment, uncertain. It was not a small thing to move. Tenzin arrived a short while later, his boots crunching softly over the thin crust of snow, and considered the fallen branch with the same unhurried attention he seemed to bring to everything. He did not seem troubled by it, though the path was, for the moment, plainly blocked. He crouched and examined where the branch lay, then took up a small hand axe from the shed near the garden and began, without any particular urgency, to clear away only the section that crossed directly over the packed earth of the path, a length no longer than his own arm, cut cleanly and set aside. The rest of the branch, the greater portion of it, he left exactly where it had fallen, sprawled off to the side of the path among the snow-dusted grass, its splintered end already beginning to darken where the moisture had settled into the raw wood. "Won't you clear the rest of it?" Kaya asked, glancing at the remaining length still lying heavily in the frost. "There's no need," Tenzin said, setting the axe aside. "It isn't blocking anything now. The rest will find its own way into the ground in its own time." Kaya looked at the broken limb a while longer, its rough bark already softening at the split, a thin rim of frost gathering along its underside, where the cold had settled overnight. It did look, she thought, a little untidy lying there, so plainly broken beside the otherwise tidy path. Some old instinct in her still wanted it gathered up entirely, sawed into neat pieces, stacked properly by the woodpile, its brokenness tidied away out of sight. But she said nothing further, and neither did Tenzin, and they continued on to the garden together, the cleared section of path once again open beneath their feet. Over the following days, she found herself glancing at the fallen branch each time she passed it, watching its slow, unhurried change. The bark dulled first, losing its faint autumn sheen. Then a fine, pale moss began to creep along its underside, so gradually she could not have said which particular morning she first noticed it. Small insects came and went along its length, indifferent to whether the branch had once been part of a living tree or was now simply becoming part of the ground beneath it. No one hurried its decay, and no one delayed it either. It simply continued, at its own unbothered pace, breaking down by degrees too slow to watch happening directly, the way the snow deepened by degrees too slow to watch, the way her own tightness had eased by degrees she had never quite caught in the act of easing. One clear afternoon, kneeling near it to gather a handful of dry kindling from beneath the nearby bamboo, she rested her palm briefly against the branch's rough surface, feeling the faint, cold dampness of the moss beginning to take hold there. It did not feel like something broken and abandoned. It felt, instead, like something quietly, patiently becoming something else. Soil, eventually. And from that soil, in some season she would likely never precisely witness, something green again. She thought of the garden she had left behind, the low fence always needing mending, the constant small effort of keeping every corner of it presentable, tidy, complete. She thought of how tired that constant tending had made her, long before she'd ever set out on the narrow path that led her here. Not everything broken needed to be repaired right away, she thought, kneeling there with her palm against the cool, softening wood. Some things simply needed to be left alone long enough to finish becoming whatever they were already, quietly on their way to becoming. She rose eventually, her kindling gathered, and continued on toward the hermitage, leaving the greater part of the branch exactly where it lay, undisturbed among the frost-dusted grass, patient and unhurried in its own long, unremarkable work. The snow continued on and off for several more days, softening the world further each time it fell, until the clearing wore a thick, unbroken white that muffled every step and every sound. Then, one evening, the clouds broke apart entirely, and the wind that had kept the lantern dark so many nights before settled at last into stillness. Kaya was gathering the last of the dry wood near the hearth when she noticed the change outside. The air suddenly calm, the snow-heavy branches no longer stirring, the whole clearing lying hushed and pale beneath an early, clear evening sky. She carried the wood inside and set it near the fire, then stepped back out into the cold, drawn by nothing more specific than the stillness itself. Tenzin was already at the lantern post. He struck the small flame the way he always struck it, cupping one weathered hand around it against a wind that tonight truly did not exist, and lowered it into the lantern's paper shade with the same unhurried care he had shown every evening since Kaya's arrival. The same small, ordinary gesture, performed without ceremony, without announcement, exactly as it had always been performed, on all the evenings when the wind allowed it. The flame caught, it steadied, warm light spilled out across the snow, gold against the endless white, touching the plum tree's lowest bare branch, touching the doorstep, touching the small drifts gathered along the path, and reaching, faintly, all the way to where Kaya stood watching. She did not say anything. Tenzin did not say anything either. He simply stepped back from the post, glanced once toward the steady flame to be sure it had caught properly, and then turned toward the door, brushing a little snow from his sleeve, his breath clouding softly in the cold, still air. Kaya remained a moment longer, watching the small light burn against the vast white hush of the clearing, the same warm glow she had first seen on the evening of her arrival, weeks and weeks before, when she had stood at the edge of the bamboo, with tired legs and a heavier heart, uncertain whether the narrow path she'd chosen had been the right one. The lantern asked nothing of her now, just as it had asked nothing of her then. It only burned, small and steady, indifferent to how long it had gone dark before, indifferent to the wind that would likely trouble it again on some future evening, content simply to be lit, for as long as tonight allowed it to be. She watched the light a while longer, her breath rising in slow, pale clouds before her, the snow beneath her feet holding the day's last cold blue shadow. Then she turned and followed Tenzin's footprints back toward the warmth of the hearth, the lantern's glow settling gently against her back as she went, the way it always had, asking for nothing, offering everything it had to offer, and needing no further word from either of them to make its small, quiet return complete. A few mornings later, with the hermitage running low on salt and the last of the season's oil, Kaya offered to walk down the mountain to the small market town at its base, a half-day's journey each way, along the same road she had first climbed weeks before. "Oh," Tenzin agreed simply, handing her a worn cloth pouch of coins and a short list of what was needed, and did not seem concerned in the slightest about her going alone, or about how long the errand might take. She set out early,
while the frost still silvered the grass at the clearing's edge, the plum trees' bare branches catching the low morning light like something drawn in fine, pale ink. The bamboo grove closed around the path almost immediately, familiar now in a way it had not been on her first evening here, when every leaning stalk had seemed part of some unknown, faintly uncertain country. The road down was long, winding through forested slopes that gradually opened into wider, more cultivated land as she descended. Small terraced fields lying fallow for winter, a scattering of farmhouses with smoke rising thin from their chimneys. The mountain itself receding slowly behind her with each turn of the path. She recognized very little of the specific landmarks, and yet she found herself walking with an ease that had nothing to do with familiarity of scenery, and everything to do with some quieter, steadier thing settled now beneath her ribs, where a different, heavier weight had once sat. She noticed, crossing a narrow wooden bridge, much like the one downstream from the hermitage, that she crossed it without pausing at all. No lingering glance down at the water below. No small private test of her own nerve. She simply crossed, the way a person crosses a threshold they no longer think of as separate from the rooms on either side of it. In the market town, she moved through the narrow streets slowly, unhurried by the noise and bustle around her. Vendors calling out prices, children weaving between the stalls, the particular clatter and voice of a place that had not, unlike the valley above it, slowed its pace for anyone. She noticed the noise without being troubled by it. It simply moved around her the way water moves around a stone, without pulling her along in its current the way it once might have. She purchased what was needed: salt, oil, a small paper packet of tea leaves Tenzin had specifically requested, a length of new rope to replace the one grown thin with wear, and found, standing at the small shop's counter, that she felt no particular urge to linger, nor any particular urge to hurry. The errands simply needed doing, and she did them, one after another, the way Tenzin folded cloth or fed a fire, attentive, unhurried, complete in themselves. On her way back through the town's edge, she passed a small garden behind a low wooden fence, its single fruit tree, bare now for the winter, much like the plum tree she had left behind at the hermitage that morning. She paused there a moment, looking at it, the fence needing mending in one corner, much like the fence she remembered from another life, another garden, another version of herself, who had once knelt in dirt very much like this. The old ache rose briefly, familiar in its shape, though softer now than it had once been, more like a stone worn smooth by long handling than a blade that still caught unexpectedly at the skin. She let it rise, and did not flinch from it, and did not linger in it either. She simply stood, breathed, let the ache pass through her the way the wind passed through the bamboo, disturbing it briefly before it settled again, unbroken, back into its familiar shape. Then she continued on, back toward the mountain road, her pack a little heavier now with the day's purchases, her steps unhurried despite the distance still ahead of her. The climb back up took longer than the descent had, as climbs always do, and the light had begun to lower toward evening by the time the familiar bamboo closed once more around the path. She recognized this time every small turn and rise of it, the place where the ground dipped near an old root, the place where the trees opened briefly onto a view of the valley below.
the place where the sound of the river first became audible again, faint and welcoming, threading up through the grove to meet her. She emerged into the clearing as the last color was draining from the sky, and saw the lantern already lit, small and warm against the deepening blue, and Tenzin's quiet shape moving near the hearth inside. She stood a moment at the clearing's edge, much as she had stood there on her very first evening, tired now in her legs, but not in the way she had been tired then. Not the tiredness of carrying something too heavy to name, but only the plain, honest tiredness of a long day's walking, the kind that a warm meal and a low fire would fully answer by morning. She had walked the same road, she realized. Down and back again, the very same stones and turns and river crossings. And yet she did not feel, standing there in the gathering dark, anything at all like the traveler who had first climbed it. She stepped forward into the lantern's waiting light and went inside. The days grew shorter after that, the snow deepening a little further with each quiet week, though it never once fell in a hurry, never once seemed impatient to bury the valley entirely. One clear, cold evening, Kea sat with Tenzin by the flat stones near the river, both of them wrapped heavily against the chill, the water running dark and steaming faintly between its white banks. Neither had spoken in some time. The silence between them now carried no weight at all, only ease, the kind that no longer needed filling. "I think," Kaya said eventually, watching her breath rise into the cold air, "I might stay through the winter."
Tenzin said nothing for a moment, only nodded slowly, his eyes on the water.
"There's room," he said simply. That was all. No question of how long, no question of after. The river ran on beneath them, indifferent to seasons, indifferent to plans made or unmade, simply continuing the way it always continued. They sat a while longer until the cold pressed too firmly against their sleeves, and then rose together and walked back up the snow-quiet path, their footprints falling for once, side by side, rather than one behind the other. The lantern was waiting at the top of the rise, its small flame steady in the windless dark, gold against the endless white. Kaya paused beneath it a moment, as she often did now, watching the light hold its shape against the night. Behind her, the plum tree stood bare and patient under its soft white weight, waiting, without complaint, for whatever spring would eventually ask of it. Somewhere behind that, unseen but always present, the bell hung silent in the garden, waiting for morning's single, round note. And beyond all of it, the river went on with its long, unbroken sentence, the same words it had spoken on the evening of her arrival, and every evening since, and every evening still to come. Whether or not anyone remained to listen, she did not think this time that this was an ending. She only thought, standing there beneath the small warm light, that the evening was, in its own quiet way, complete. Not because anything had been resolved, not because any question had been fully answered, but simply because the lantern was lit and the snow was soft and the river was moving, and somewhere close by, in a warm room with a low fire, a bed waited that no longer felt like a stranger's bed at all. She stepped inside. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing a deep, quiet orange in the dim room. Tenzin was already settling into his own corner, his movements slow, unhurried, familiar now in every small particular. Kaya lay down on her low bed,
pulling the blanket close, listening to the fire's soft tick as it settled further into ash. Outside, the lantern burned on, small and steady against the vast, gentle dark. The snow lay hushed across the clearing, holding the day's last warmth beneath its cold white weight. The river continued, patient and whole, threading its dark path between white banks that would, in their own time, soften back into green. And somewhere in the quiet between one breath and the next, between the fire's last soft murmur and the river's long unbroken sentence, between the lantern's steady glow and the bare branches waiting patiently for spring, Kaya's eyes grew heavy and then heavier still. And the evening went on being an evening, unhurried, unfinished, entirely at peace with never quite needing to end at all. Morning came slowly, the way it always came in the valley, the dark thinning by degrees into a pale, unhurried grey, before settling finally into the soft gold of early light over the ridge. Kaya woke before the bell, as she often did now, and lay still a moment beneath her blanket, listening to the small sounds gathering around her, the faint creak of the roof settling, the muffled hush of the river beneath a thin morning mist. Somewhere close by the dry, papery rustle of the bamboo stirring in a breeze, too gentle to properly call wind, she rose, dressed, and stepped outside. The clearing lay quiet under a soft frost, the plum tree's bare branches traced in pale silver, the grass stiff and pale beneath her feet. Smoke was already rising thin from the side of the hermitage, unhurried, dissolving into the cold morning air. She found Tenzin at the small hearth, feeding it a few dry sticks, the kettle already set beside him, waiting. He glanced up as she approached and moved slightly, without a word, to make room for her on the low stone bench. She sat. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fire caught slowly, the way it always caught, orange licking up along the thin wood, and somewhere beyond the clearing, the river ran on beneath its low morning mist, patient and unseen. The same water it had always been, moving the same way it had always moved. When the kettle finally stirred with the first restless heat, Tenzin lifted it aside to settle and measured the tea leaves into 2 worn clay cups with the same unhurried care he brought to everything, and poured, slowly, the water falling in its thin, steady thread from one cup to the next. Kaya took her cup with both hands, feeling its warmth soak into her palms, and looked out past the plum tree toward the mist still clinging low along the riverbank, thinning now in patches as the morning light strengthened. The bell rang once, somewhere behind them, round and low, and faded into the cold air without needing anything further to complete it. Kaya drank her tea slowly. Beside her, Tenzin drank his the same way, his eyes half closed, watching nothing in particular, or perhaps everything, in the unfocused way of someone who no longer needed to look closely at a thing to know it was there. When her cup was empty, she set it down on the stone beside her, rose and picked up the small woven basket resting by the door. The garden was waiting, its rose still touched with frost, a few hardy greens holding on beneath the cold. She knelt at the near end of the first row, brushed the thin frost from a cluster of leaves, and began, unhurried, to gather what the morning had to offer. Behind her, the mist continued to lift slowly from the water. The bamboo leaned and straightened in its soft, unfelt wind, and the river, beneath it all, went on with its long, unbroken sentence. The
the same one it had been speaking on the evening Kea first arrived, and every morning since, and would go on speaking, quietly, into whatever mornings were still to come.